Hi, this is Kevin Lee, and right now I'm going over the timeline for the development. Okay, begin I was born. Let's talk about the conception of my mother, like of the natural process of conception. Zygote. The fertilized egg, it enters a 2-week period of rapid cell division and development, develops into an embryo. An embryo is the developing human organism from 2 weeks after fertilization through the second month. And fetus, the developing human organism from 9 weeks after conception to birth. So this is like the typical process for anyone to be born. And now let's talk about when I was born and from the birth to 4 months. So let's talk about the physical stage. So first of all, the inborn skills. And babies have reflexes, and these are actually the ability that they do not have to learn. First of all, is routine reflex. It's like when touch on cheek turn and babies, or like just myself when I was 4 a month, and I will turn head and put the object in mouth. And sucking reflex is like to suck when the object is placed in mouth. And next is grasping reflex, trying to grasp on like an object that is placed in hand or foot. Next one is like the crying when hungry, like using the right sounds to motivate parents to end the noise and feed the baby. And moral reflex, when startled, infant extends arms, arches, and its back and brings its arm towards each other. Next one is Babskin reflex. And I think this is like the most interesting one. Like when foot is stroked at the sole, the toes will spread out. And next about newborn senses. First one is hearing. It's like one of the dominant sense for a newborn baby. And babies can hear before birth, learn to recognize and adapt to sounds, habituate to any annoying sounds. Vision is not a dominant sense, and baby prefer face-like objects, can see well 8 to 12 inches. Everything else is a blur. And next, let's talk about motor development. So first, dominant motor action for babies roll over, and then they will stand, and then they will walk along. And basically, stand and walk along happens when babies are 1 year old or 1.5 year old. And next, as the baby grows, maturation happens. And maturation refers to biologically driven growth and development, enabling orderly changes in behavior. And brain development is essential as well. In womb, neurons grow by about 750,000 new cells per minute. And after birth, connections among neurons proliferate more neural networks. And infancy, neurons connection grow in the less complex parts of the brain, like brainstem and limbic system, as well as the motor and sensory strips. And finally, early childhood, neuron connections proliferate in association areas. And after talking about the baby's physical change, and it will eventually develop into adolescence, which is the transition period from childhood to adulthood. Then it will become at adulthood, physical changes in middle adulthood and in later life, cognitive development and decline, physical decline, sensory changes, and lifespan and death. And the adult physical development in mid-20s, we reach a peak in the natural physical abilities which come with biological maturation. It does include muscular strength, cardiac output, reaction time, and sensory sensitivity. And then physical changes, adulthood, is like gradual decline in sexual activity in adulthood, although sexuality can continue throughout life. Around age of 50, women enter menopause. And then lastly, physical changes with age. It definitely would decline, and this ability decline include visual acuity, hearing, especially higher pitch, and reaction time and general motor abilities, and then neural processing speed for complex and novel tasks. And that's the basically for the physical change of my life. And then let's talk about the cognitive for my development. First of all, at age about 4 months, so cognitive development involves cognition definitely, which is a mental activity that helps us function, including problem solving, figuring out the world, developing models and concepts, and finally using inner thoughts. Children will usually view the world through schemata, which is a schema, and they will develop a simulation. It's like incorporate experiences into existing schema, and then accommodation is like new information to modify existing schema. So one is like absorb a new knowledge, and another one is the new knowledge affect the old storage house. Like you can actually understand like this. And when talk about cognitive development, we have to mention a psychologist called John Piaget. And he is the creator of the first intelligence test, and he focused on child development. And he thinks nature and nurture are both important for cognitive development, and he supports stages development. And more specifically, he studied the errors in cognition made by children in order to understand in what ways they think differently than adults. We will have stages of thinking. So first of all, at the birth to 2 years, there's a stage called sensory motor stage. It's like experiencing the world through senses actions. For example, looking, hearing, touching, mouthing, and grasping. And in this stage, children will develop object permanence, and this is actually a major challenge for those babies. And this actually means objects continue to exist even when out of our sensory range. And some babies will find it difficult because they cannot see the objects after they're removed from the visual range. And next, there will be a stranger anxiety, the distress that babies experience when they meet or are left in the life in the care of people who are familiar with to them. Yeah, it's actually a fun fact. Like my mom told me that when I was about 7 months, I was not willing to let others hug or touch me. I would cry so loud. I only want my mom to hug me. And for like back to stage of thinking, the next one is 2 years to 7 years, and which is called the pre-operational stage. And this actually means representing things with words and images using intuitive rather than logical reasoning. And be more specifically, in this stage, children involve egocentrism. They can only see world from their own perspective, and pretend play, which means a form of symbolic play where children use objects, actions, or ideas to represent other objects, actions, or ideas, using their imaginations to assign roles to inanimate objects or people. And also artificialism, like children in this stage believe all things are made by people. And theory of mind, the ability to understand that others have their own thoughts and perspectives. And this is me when I was like 3 or 4 years old, I believe. Yeah. Next, there will be concrete operational stage, which is like 8 years to 12 years. Like babies, I mean, teenagers are thinking logically about create a concrete events, and they understand complex relationship between different characteristics of objects. And in this stage, children will develop conservation ability, which is the realization that properties or objects remains the same even when their shapes change. And mathematical transformation, for example, volume, area, numbers, children in this stage could have the ability to calculate those complex information. Next one, we will have formal operational stage, which is like 12 through adulthood. Like people will gain abstract reasoning and gain metacognition. Metacognition means that the thinking ability about the way we think. And abstract logic, formal system consisting of a class of sentences and satisfaction relation with specific properties related to occurrence, expansion, isomorphism, renaming, and quantification. And last but not the least, let's talk about development psychologist Lev Vygotsky. And he focused on how kids learn in the context of social communication. And he saw development as building and scaffold of mentoring, language, and cognitive support from parents and others. And here's actually a picture I got it from the PowerPoint deck. It's like the development is in the middle, and social interaction, language, and culture are on the side. And social interaction and language and culture will interpret or affect each other. And then they will all develop into the concept of development. So development consists of social interaction, language, and culture, and the outer circle will influence each other as well. After talking about cognitive development, let's talk about the social development. So, first of all, let's talk about a psychologist called Mary Ann Swartz. She observed infants' reactions when placed into strange situations, and she identified 3 major styles of attachment that children have to their parents or caregivers. So she is Mary Ann Swartz. And so for attachment, the reciprocal relationship between caregiver and child. Oh, by the way, I have to mention that because I divide the whole timeline for 4 section, and here's social section. See a little 1 here. It actually represents from the birth to the death. So it's just a okay. So and attachment is a reciprocal relationship between caregiver and child. And there are several attachment styles. First of all, secure attachment. It's like distressed when parents are absent and seeking contact with parents when returned. Next one is avoidant attachment. It's seeming indifferent to mother's departure and return, and insecure attachment. Next one, anxious attachment. This is also an insecure attachment, and in this attachment, babies may show extreme stress when parents but resist their comfort when they return. And here's a fun fact actually. My parents told me that when I was little, I would cry when my mom was not in my side, and I would be calm when my mom can come back to me, and I just keep playing my toys and keep exploring the world. And I think that's definitely one of the secure attachment. And by the way, when I cry, I don't listen to anyone else except my mom. Yeah, that's my personal experience. And next, we will talk about the parenting styles. So there are basically like 4 types of parenting styles. The first one is authoritarian. It's like sets strict standards for children's behavior, and punishment is used more than reinforcement. And next one is permissive, and don't set clear guidelines for children. And rules are usually not enforced. And the next one is authoritative. It's like set consistent standards, children, and encouragement as often as punishment. And the last one is neglectful parenting styles, which means there's no rules and parents are not involved and children are indifferent. And there's fun facts. It's also my personal experience. I think that my parents have different parenting styles when I was little, and my mom might be more authoritarian, but it's not absolute authoritarian. It's just like a little more of that aspect. And when I was little, but my dad was more authoritative, since he always encouraged me to find the answer like for my question independently, and like always give me encouragement. And Diana Barman, who is a clinical and developmental psychologist, and she researched on parenting styles, and she critiques of the use of the deception in psychological research. So this lady is Diana Barman. And next one, we're going to talk about attachment. So we need to recognize like Harry Hollow. It's a maternal separation dependency needs. I mean, he studied maternal separation dependence needs and social isolation experiments on rhesus monkeys, which manifested the importance of caregiving and companionship to social and cognitive development. And in this experiment, like talk about it briefly, it's basically like the monkey will run to a soft mom, like not the arrow mom which will give the monkey food. Instead, the monkey will tend to a soft mom, which have like evolved with a comfortable touch. Next, one of the most important social psychologists, Erik Erikson. He is best known for a theory on psychological development of human beings. He actually invented the psychosocial stage theory, and this gentleman is Erik Erikson. So stages of psychosocial development, first of all, is trust and mistrust. I have to mention that every stage of psychosocial development contains a conflict. And first one is trust and versus mistrust. It's basically birth to 1.5 years. And it's the sense of trust or mistrust carries for life. Like baby, you want to trust someone or just don't trust that one or that caregiver. And the second one is autonomy versus shame and doubt. It's about 1.5 years to 3 years. Toddlers begin to exert their will over their bodies and learn to exercise their will and do things for themselves or adopt their abilities. Next one is initiative versus guilt. It's about 3 years to 6 years. Preschoolers learn to initiate tasks and carry out plans where they guilty about their efforts to be independent. And this picture is me about the age of 3 or 2. Yeah, because I can't recognize that. My mom told me. And this is me like at the age of 4 or 5. Yeah, and I am curious about the sand, like the beach, and I was enjoying my time there. Next, we will have industry versus inferiority. It's like 6 years old to puberty. So children learn the pleasure of applying themselves to tasks or they feel inferior. And this is me at the age of 6 or 7. Yeah, and I look entirely differently right now. And next we will have identity versus role confusion. It's like 10 years to 20 years old. And in adolescence, our main social task is to discover what's the social identity we are most comfortable with. And in this stage, we will have identity crisis. If an adolescent doesn't figure out a sense of self, they might have one later in life and like a confusion. Next, we will have intimacy versus isolation. It's like about early adulthood, like 20 to 40s. And a young adult figure out how to balance time and effort between work, relationship, and self. And next one, we will have generativity and stagnation. It's about middle adulthood, like 40 to 60. People discover a sense of contributing to the world, usually through family and work, or they may feel a lack of purpose. And next one, like the last one, integrity versus despair, is at late adulthood, like 60 through death, and it reflects on life, may feel a sense of satisfaction or failure. The social development for my entire life, and here's some add-on content for the social unit. So bystander effect, which is the tendency for any given bystander to be less likely to give aid if other bystanders are present. Next one, frustration and aggression principle. Like the principle that frustration, the blocking of an attempt to achieve some goal, creates anger, which can generate aggression. And reciprocity norm, which means the expectation that people will help, not hurt those have helped them. When I was little, when I was very young, I believe in this like if I help one of the classmates to clean the table, like they will actually help me back. But sometimes the society doesn't work like that. And social responsibility and expectation that people will help those needing for their help. And this really applied to me when I was very little, and I really have a conception that people are really helpful, and normally people would be willing to help me when I was in difficulty. But after growing up, I find it's not always the truth. And next one is altruism. It's an unselfish regard for the welfare of others. And there's a fun fact: I actually have actually achieved altruism for some time. I helped my lacrosse teammate buy a bottle of orange juice during lunch break, and it's for free. Because I think I know this thing is a little, but I think it's reveal the sense of altruism in my life. Let's talk about the last perspective. The last area for my development timeline: moral development. And when talking about moral development, we have to talk about Lawrence Kohlberg, who described how our ability to reason about ethical situations changes over our lives. And he asked children to think about specifically moral situations. And moral intuition, our reasoning may be directed by emotions such as, first of all, disgust about evil acts, and then elevated feelings about generosity and courage. And here's a famous dilemma called Hind dilemma. And Hind, who is a guy, must make a moral choice about whether to steal a drug he can afford to save his wife's life. And let's talk about levels of moral reasoning. First of all, it's pre-conventional. It's up to age 9. Focus on making the decision most likely to avoid punishment. And next, we will have conventional. Conventional. It's like early adolescents look at the moral choice through the eyes of others, make the choice based on how others will view them. Next one, we will have post-conventional. It's later adolescence and adulthood. In this level, it examines the right and values evolved the choice, and also self-defined ethical principles involved. However, there are some criticisms of Kohlberg, and this lady name is Carol Gigligan. She states that Kohlberg developed the model based on responsive of voice, and she thinks that whether there's gender differences, and she find out that boys have a more absolute view of what is moral, and girls pay more attention to the situational factors. However, recent research doesn't support her gender differences theory in moral development. So there's some debate, but we cannot actually solve that argument. And that's basically for the moral development. Finally, here's some add-on content for the personality. And this really focus on Sigmund Freud. So he is actually a founder of psychoanalysis, and his clinical method for treating psychopathology through dialogue between a patient and a psychoanalyst is like this gentleman. And he developed stages for psychosexual stages. So first stage is oral stage, which is like the birth to 1 year old. Infants actually seek pleasure through mouth. And let's talk about fixation first. So fixation means that if failed to resolve a significant problem in our lives in one of these stages, we become fixed in this stage, and this remain preoccupied with behaviors associated with that stage. And so here the first stage is oral stage, and the fixation for this stage is overeating, smoking, childlike dependence action. And next stage is anal stage, which is 1 year to 3 years old, and like children develops during toilet training. And there's some fixation. And first fixation is retentive. It's like overtly controlling. Video that in the goose chase, there's a man like developed that. His parents told him to do something or something, and he eventually developed a retentive fixation for anal stage. And the explosive fixation, which means that out of control, like the parents actually cannot control their children in the future. And next one is phallic stage, which is 3 years to 6 years old. Like babies realize their gender, and Oedipus complex and the Electra complex actually happened in this stage. And fixation is the problems in relationships. Next one, we will have latency stage. It's like a 6-year-old to puberty, and it's a period of calm and low psychosexual energy. And some psychoanalysts doesn't agree with this stage. They consider this stage as nothing. Like they do not willing to contain this stage in their study, but it's just for some of them. And the next one is genital stage. It's like the rest of life. It focuses on sexual pleasure and its genitals. And there's a quote I found said by Sigmund Freud. It's like these tasks are set to everyone, and it is remarkable how seldom they are dealt with in an ideal manner. Said by Freud in Introductory of Psychology in 1917. And for this, there's a last concept called Oedipus complex, and I saw this term on this YouTube video, and it basically talks about the complex of emotions aroused in a young child, typically around 4, by an unconscious sexual desire for the parents of the opposite sex, and wish to exclude the parent of the same sex. And this is actually for the boy actually, and for the girl is Electra complex. And here's the add-on ticket for add-on context for the personality, and this is actually the whole development of my timeline, and I made it for this.